Good evening. Welcome to my channel, where today's Iranian defiance collides with tomorrow's American deadline through Tehran's categorical rejection of American pressure tactics, with senior Iranian officials declaring publicly that Islamic Republic will not bow under any amount of military threats or economic coercion, choosing to maintain sovereign rights over uranium enrichment and ballistic missile development, regardless of consequences that Trump's 10-day ultimatum warns will include devastating military strikes if Iran refuses nuclear deal structured entirely on American terms. 10 days represents specific compressed timeline that either expires tonight or within next 72 hours, depending on exact announcement date, creating binary choice between diplomacy producing breakthrough agreement that both sides can accept, or war beginning through American strikes that USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is ready to execute immediately upon presidential authorization, now that America's most powerful warship has completed transit through Mediterranean and approaches operational position where 75 advanced combat aircraft can launch against Iranian targets within hours of Trump giving final go order that sources indicate President is seriously considering, despite risks of prolonged conflict that Pentagon planners warn could exceed initial limited strike concept if Iranian resistance proves more effective than intelligence assessments predicted. Iran preparing nuclear counterproposal within days represents Tehran's last diplomatic gambit, attempting to find middle ground where symbolic enrichment capability gets preserved while accepting intrusive inspections and strict limits preventing weapons breakout. But this offer comes as Trump administration has already decided that token enrichment, leaving any Iranian nuclear infrastructure intact, creates unacceptable risk of future violations, requiring America to either accept Iranian cheating or return to military option after regime has used diplomatic breathing space to further harden facilities and develop countermeasures against American strike capabilities. That current window of vulnerability won't persist indefinitely as Russian and Chinese support helps Iran improve defenses, making future operations more costly than striking now while American advantages remain decisive. But Israeli officials' assessment that U.S. and Iran face unbridgeable impasse approaching open conflict reveals Jerusalem's intelligence conclusion based on monitoring both sides' diplomatic positions and internal decision-making that no conceivable compromise exists, satisfying American demands for comprehensive, verifiable limitations while preserving sufficient Iranian nuclear capability that Khamenei can claim vindicated resistance against American imperialism. Unbridgeable impasse means gaps between positions exceed what negotiation can close through normal give and take, where each side makes incremental concessions reaching middle ground. Both can accept, instead reflecting fundamental incompatibility where American insistence on near-zero enrichment with unlimited international inspections directly contradicts Iranian demand for sovereign enrichment rights, with limited verification that respects national security sensitivities about military sites that Tehran refuses to open for foreign inspectors, who Iran suspects are really intelligence officers gathering targeting data for future strikes. Israeli officials noting these irreconcilable differences prove that even America's closest ally has concluded diplomacy will fail, and military confrontation becomes inevitable once Trump's 10-day deadline expires without Iranian capitulation, that Jerusalem assesses supreme leader cannot politically deliver even if Khamenei personally wanted to avoid conflict, because hardline factions within Revolutionary Guard and clerical establishment would view any surrender of enrichment as betrayal of Islamic Revolution's principles, requiring Khamenei's removal through internal coup rather than accepting humiliating terms that decades of sanctions and pressure were designed to force, but which Iranian resistance successfully prevented by maintaining unity against external coercion. And Trump facing military trap where cannot pull back without losing face politically creates the dynamic where Iran's defiant refusal to bow under pressure effectively locks President into military action, regardless of personal preference for diplomatic solution, because backing down after deploying overwhelming force and issuing specific ultimatum would constitute unacceptable demonstration of weakness that domestic opponents and international adversaries would exploit to portray Trump as paper tiger whose threats can be safely ignored. Military trap operates through reputational logic, where leaders' credibility depends on following through on public commitments, making private doubts about wisdom of military action politically irrelevant once those commitments have been made before domestic and international audiences whose expectations demand action matching rhetoric, or else suffer devastating loss of face that undermines not just Iranian policy, but broader American deterrence globally, as rivals conclude Trump's threats are bluffs that determined resistance can overcome. Cannot pull back means Trump has foreclosed diplomatic exit that would allow face-saving retreat, leaving only binary options of striking Iran as threatened or accepting political humiliation that damages presidency potentially beyond recovery if portrayed as weak leader who talks tough but shrinks from necessary action when adversaries call bluff. Iran's calculation in refusing to bow under pressure is precisely to expose this trap by maintaining defiance that forces Trump to either execute threats and accept resulting costs of prolonged conflict, or back down and accept political costs of revealed impotence, betting that Trump's domestic constraints and fears about casualties make backing down despite loss of face the less damaging option compared to military quagmire that Iranian resistance could create through asymmetric capabilities that sanctions have forced Tehran to develop specifically for this scenario. Trump's 10-day ultimatum creating diplomacy or war binary choice represents presidential attempt to force Iranian decision through compressed timeline that eliminates possibility of indefinite delay and incremental concessions that previous negotiations allowed, making Khamenei choose between complete surrender, accepting American terms immediately, or military confrontation that weeks of buildup have positioned American forces to wage with overwhelming superiority. Diplomacy or war framing eliminates middle ground where Iran makes partial concessions buying time for further negotiation, forcing all-or-nothing decision where either Iran accepts comprehensive agreement addressing nuclear program, missiles, and proxies simultaneously on American timeline, or Trump orders strikes that 10-day countdown has been building toward through steady escalation of rhetoric and military positioning, creating momentum toward conflict that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse as deadline approaches. But this binary framing creates danger of misperception, where Trump assumes Iranian resistance will break under deadline pressure, and Khamenei will choose diplomacy at last moment to avoid war, while Iranian leadership assumes American ultimatum is bluff, designed to extract maximum concessions, and that Trump will extend deadline or modify demands when Iran demonstrates willingness to negotiate but not surrender completely. These incompatible assumptions create collision where both sides discover too late that opponent was serious, producing war that better mutual understanding of intentions and constraints might have prevented through compromise neither can now accept without appearing to capitulate under duress that domestic audiences would punish. USS Ford, ready to attack, represents operational milestone where America's most powerful warship has completed transit and achieved strike position, removing last major capability gap that might have justified delaying operations until additional forces arrived. Ford ready means carrier air wing has conducted final rehearsals, weapons are loaded on aircraft, targeting packages are updated with latest intelligence, pilots have been briefed on mission details, and strike authorization protocols are prepared requiring only presidential approval to initiate launches within hours rather than days. Attack readiness proves military option is not contingent future possibility, but immediate reality that can execute tonight if Trump decides Iranian counterproposal arriving in days is too little too late, or if Iranian actions during remaining ultimatum hours create provocation that Trump uses as justification for ordering strikes before deadline formally expires. Ford's 75 aircraft combined with Abraham Lincoln's approximately 70 combat jets plus 60 attack aircraft at Jordan Base, documented through satellite images, creates strike package exceeding 200 advanced fighters, bombers, and support aircraft that Iran's limited air defenses cannot effectively challenge once American electronic warfare, stealth penetration, and overwhelming numbers create permissive environment for sustained operations, destroying nuclear facilities, missile sites, air defenses, and potentially regime leadership if Trump chooses comprehensive campaign option that abandoning short strike concept suggests president is seriously considering, despite congressional opposition and allied concerns about unintended consequences. And Trump administration's consideration of token nuclear enrichment option, where Iran maintains symbolic program incapable of producing weapons, represents significant American flexibility from previous demands for complete dismantlement. But this concession comes with conditions so strict that Iranian acceptance remains unlikely given Supreme Leader's public commitments to maintaining enrichment rights. Token enrichment means allowing Iran to operate several hundred centrifuges enriching uranium to low single-digit percentages, suitable only for medical isotopes or research reactors, requiring Iran to dismantle vast majority of current 14,000 centrifuges and ship out existing stockpiles of 20% and 60% enriched uranium that approach weapons-grade levels. Leaves no possible path to bomb is the critical condition that turns token into nearly zero through intrusive inspections, real-time monitoring, strict stockpile limits measured in kilograms rather than tons, and potentially international control over Iranian fuel cycle, where foreign consortium manages enrichment activities preventing Iranian government from conducting clandestine parallel program. Senior U.S. official confirming this option proves internal administration debate, where some advisors argue that allowing symbolic Iranian enrichment creates diplomatic breakthrough enabling agreement, while others warn that any enrichment capability left intact creates unacceptable risk of Iranian cheating that requires either accepting violations or returning to military option after diplomatic window closes, and Iran has hardened facilities making future strikes more difficult. Trump's decision between these competing recommendations determines whether Iranian counterproposal finds receptive audience or gets rejected as insufficient regardless of substance, with 10-day ultimatum creating artificial urgency forcing decision before all information is available or consequences are fully understood. Trump's Iran options ranging from token enrichment to taking out Khamenei personally reveal spectrum of possibilities where diplomatic minimum accepting limited Iranian nuclear capability exists on one end, while military maximum pursuing regime change through leadership assassination anchors opposite extreme, with various combinations of limited strikes, comprehensive campaigns, and post-conflict scenarios filling the middle ground that Trump and advisors are debating during countdown to deadline expiration. Taking out Khamenei represents most aggressive option, where American strikes target Supreme Leader personally through precision weapons hitting his residences, offices, motorcades, or other locations where intelligence tracking suggests he will be vulnerable, creating decapitation scenario where Revolutionary Guard loses ultimate authority figure and potentially fragments into competing factions that weaken regime, enabling internal opposition to seize power without requiring American ground forces to occupy territory and establish new government. This option appeals to Trump's instinct for dramatic, decisive action that achieves maximum impact through single operation rather than incremental approach requiring sustained commitment, but carries enormous risks where failure to kill Khamenei in initial strike could rally Iranian nationalism around Supreme Leader who survives assassination attempt, while success could create power vacuum filled by more hardline Revolutionary Guard commanders who prove even more hostile to American interests than current regime that at least maintains some internal debate between pragmatists and hardliners. Reports that potential U.S. military strikes could target specific individuals, including Khamenei, confirms that regime change scenarios Pentagon is preparing include personalized targeting where operations don't just destroy infrastructure, but eliminate human leadership that directs Iranian nuclear program, missile development, and proxy networks. Targeting individuals represents evolution from Cold War-era prohibitions against assassinating foreign leaders that executive orders banned to protect American officials from reciprocal targeting, toward post-9/11 paradigm where terrorists and their state sponsors are legitimate targets for lethal action, including drone strikes and special operations raids that Obama administration extensively employed against al-Qaeda and Islamic State leaders. Pursuing regime change through individual targeting rather than comprehensive military campaign offers political advantage of avoiding Iraq war comparisons about occupation and nation building, instead framing operations as counterterrorism against Revolutionary Guard commanders who organize attacks on American forces and allies, making Khamenei's elimination appear as logical extension of targeting terrorist leadership rather than illegal assassination of foreign head of state. But this framing is transparent fiction because everyone understands Supreme Leader is political leader, not terrorist commander, making his targeting fundamentally regime change operation that international law prohibits, and that could trigger Iranian retaliation targeting American political leadership through similar justifications about eliminating terrorist supporters. Iranian declaration that will not bow under pressure regardless of military threats represents fundamental statement of regime philosophy, where resistance to external coercion defines Islamic Republic's identity and legitimacy since 1979 revolution that overthrew American-aligned Shah, making capitulation to Trump's ultimatum equivalent to surrender of revolutionary principles that would undermine entire basis of clerical rule. Will not bow is specific language choice with religious and cultural resonance in Persian political discourse, where bowing symbolizes submission and humiliation that proud nations reject even when facing superior force, preferring honorable resistance to dishonorable surrender that might preserve lives and resources but destroy national dignity that Iranian identity depends upon. Under pressure acknowledges that American military buildup and economic sanctions create enormous coercion, attempting to force Iranian capitulation, but declares that this pressure, however intense, cannot break Iranian will to maintain sovereignty and resist hegemonic domination that acceptance of American demands would constitute in Tehran's interpretation. This defiant posture serves both external and internal audiences, telling Washington that threats will not produce desired concessions while reassuring domestic population that government will not betray revolutionary ideals by submitting to foreign dictates, regardless of costs imposed through continued resistance. But defiance also creates inflexibility where Iranian leadership has committed publicly to rejecting American terms, making acceptance of Trump's ultimatum politically impossible without appearing to contradict stated principles, effectively foreclosing diplomatic option and making military confrontation inevitable once deadline expires. Iran preparing nuclear counterproposal ready within days represents Tehran's attempt to demonstrate good faith engagement with diplomacy while maintaining core positions that preserve enrichment capability and national sovereignty. Counterproposal substance likely includes Iranian willingness to cap enrichment at 5% levels suitable for civilian nuclear reactors, accept enhanced IAEA inspections, including some military sites, if done through managed access protocols respecting security concerns, freeze centrifuge installation, preventing expansion of enrichment capacity while maintaining existing infrastructure, and implement transparency measures providing confidence that program remains peaceful through real-time monitoring and sample analysis that detects any diversion toward weapons production. Ready within days, timing suggests Iranian negotiators are finalizing details with clerical and Revolutionary Guard leadership, whose approval Khamenei needs before presenting offer, with timing calculated to arrive before Trump's 10-day deadline expires, providing last-minute diplomatic off-ramp that might prevent military strikes if Trump concludes Iranian concessions are sufficient even if they don't meet every American demand. But reports that U.S. envoy seeks to separate nuclear issue from missiles and proxies contrary to Israel's demands reveals potential U.S.-Israeli disagreement, where Washington might accept nuclear-only deal, while Netanyahu insists comprehensive agreement must address all three threat sources simultaneously, creating scenario where Trump accepts Iranian offer that Israel views as insufficient, potentially forcing unilateral Israeli strikes that America didn't approve but feels obligated to support through alliance commitments. Trump abandoning short Iran strike concept in favor of readying extended campaign for weeks-long operation signals presidential decision that limited attacks destroying only nuclear facilities would leave Iranian regime intact with capability to reconstitute program through Russian and Chinese technical assistance that makes temporary setback into long-term strategic failure. Abandoning short strike means Trump has concluded that quick in-and-out operation, similar to previous limited strikes, is inadequate for achieving lasting elimination of Iranian nuclear threat, requiring instead sustained campaign that systematically destroys not just enrichment facilities but also missile production, Revolutionary Guard infrastructure, air defense networks, naval capabilities, and potentially regime leadership through comprehensive bombardment extending over weeks rather than days. Extended campaign requires dual carrier presence that USS Ford's arrival enables, with Lincoln and Ford rotating operations maintaining continuous strike capability. While one conducts missions, the other recovers aircraft and rearms, creating persistent pressure that wears down Iranian resistance through attrition that limited strike couldn't achieve. Weeks-long timeline signals Trump's willingness to accept prolonged conflict that congressional critics warn could become a quagmire, but administration calculates that overwhelming American military superiority makes Iranian resistance unsustainable beyond several weeks maximum before regime either collapses internally or sues for peace-accepting terms that diplomatic pressure alone could never extract. Pentagon preparing for prolonged Iran conflict through base evacuations, logistics stockpiling, and contingency planning proves military expects operations extending well beyond initial strikes into sustained campaign, requiring continuous resupply and force rotation. Prolonged conflict means weeks or potentially months of operations rather than days, indicating military planners assess Iranian resistance will survive opening attacks and mount counteroffensive using missiles, drones, proxies, and asymmetric capabilities, forcing American response to evolve beyond initial war plans. Base evacuations from Qatar and Bahrain, removing non-essential personnel while maintaining operational capability, demonstrates Pentagon expects Iranian retaliation will target American facilities across Gulf region. making casualty prevention require relocating personnel to safer locations, while accepting that remaining forces face attack risks that commanders judge acceptable given strategic importance of maintaining bases for strike operations. Weighing options from targeted killings to regime change captures range of scenarios military has developed, with lowest intensity involving assassination of specific Revolutionary Guard commanders and nuclear scientists through drone strikes, while highest intensity pursues comprehensive regime elimination through sustained bombardment, plus covert support for opposition groups that intelligence agencies cultivate for post-conflict transition. Israelis keeping suitcases packed as Trump weighs strike decision reveals Israeli civilian anxiety about Iranian retaliation. That offensive doctrine threatens to deliver preemptively or in response to American attacks that Tehran will blame on Israeli influence, despite operations being conducted primarily by American forces. Suitcases packed means families prepared for evacuation if conflict escalates beyond Israel's defensive capabilities to protect population from sustained missile bombardment that thousands of Iranian weapons could deliver, despite Iron Dome intercepting majority, making relocation to safer areas, or potentially leaving country entirely rational precaution for those with means and alternative destinations. As Trump weighs decision captures moment of suspended uncertainty, where strike authorization could come any hour as 10-day ultimatum approaches expiration, with Israeli civilians understanding that their security depends on American president's judgment about whether Iranian counterproposal arriving within days provides sufficient concessions to prevent military action their own government supports through 59% polling, but which carries risks of retaliation that no defensive system can completely eliminate. The convergence is complete where Iran's defiant declaration that it will not bow under pressure collides with Trump's 10-day ultimatum, creating binary choice between diplomacy, producing breakthrough agreement within hours, or war beginning through strikes that USS Ford is ready to execute immediately. Iranian counterproposal arriving within days represents last diplomatic effort that may prove too little too late if Trump has already decided military option is necessary, while token enrichment consideration suggests American flexibility that Israeli officials warn is insufficient given unbridgeable impasse between positions. Military trap preventing Trump from backing down without losing face means Iranian defiance effectively locks president into strikes regardless of personal preference for avoiding conflict, creating collision where both sides' domestic political constraints make compromise impossible, even when rational analysis suggests negotiated solution would serve both parties' interests better than military confrontation, whose costs exceed benefits. Pentagon preparing prolonged conflict proves military understands extended campaign will be necessary if Iranian resistance survives initial strikes, while Israelis packing suitcases demonstrates allied anxiety about retaliation that defensive systems cannot fully prevent. Diplomacy or war binary choice approaches moment of truth as deadline expires within hours or days, testing whether Iranian defiance breaks under final pressure of imminent strikes, or whether Trump's trap forces military action that sustained diplomatic engagement might have prevented through compromise. Neither leader can now accept without political humiliation that defending through force appears preferable to avoiding through negotiation that domestic audiences would interpret as weakness rather than wisdom.